The Valcross Military Academy didn't believe in gentle introductions. Their third-year engineering trial happened in a converted hangar bay that smelled like ozone and recycled air, where cadets were given 4 hours, random components, and one simple instruction: build something that survives when the combat drones activate. Cadet Rachel Torres stood at her assigned workstation and stared at her equipment allocation. With growing disbelief, one standard-issue furniture module, administrative class, the kind found in a quartermaster's office, complete with holographic display panel, 3 auto-adjusting drawers, and a promotional sticker reading "Comfort meets efficiency." Someone had given her a desk dot around her. Other cadets unpacked proper military components fabrication cores, weapon mounts, tactical chassis frameworks. She watched a Velian cadet heft a shield generator onto his workbench. A karate unwrapped targeting arrays with crystalline precision. Problem, Terran? Instructor Kethver loomed over her station. 6.5 feet of Velian engineering excellence wrapped in a uniform decorated with 12 combat commendations. His face carried perpetual skepticism, like he'd spent his entire career watching cadets fail. "No problem, Instructor." Rachel kept her voice level, hands already moving to flip the desk module onto its side. "Curious allocation, isn't it?" Keffer's voice carried across the hangar, drawing attention from nearby stations. Some cadets receive fabrication cores, weapon mounts, tactical chassis frameworks. Others receive office equipment. I'm sure there's a perfectly logical explanation. A Velian cadet, 2 stations over designation VK293, built like a cargo hauler, didn't bother hiding his laugh. Maybe Command thinks she bored the drones to death with administrative forms. Efficiency reports, another added. A Kryn, judging by the mandible clicking that passed for amusement in their species. Death by paperwork. Rachel produced a multi-tool from her belt and started removing the desk's access panel. The screws were standard civilian grade. Not even security lock.qe single quotes VAR crouched beside her station, voice dropping to something almost conversational. "You understand the trial parameters, cadet? Build a functional combat system. Survive engagement with Academy standard attack drones. 4-hour time limit." He paused. "And you believe you can accomplish this with furniture?" She glanced up just briefly, expression unreadable. "We'll find out, won't we?" Human improvisation. Kepfer stood, addressing the room with theatrical skepticism. "The great myth of Terran engineering. I've read the reports, of course. Miracle solutions cobbled together from spare parts and desperation. Ships held together with bypass cables and optimism." He gestured dismissively. "An entire species that apparently learned technology by hitting things with rocks until something useful happened." VK293 was assembling a standard defensive turret at his station. Proper components slotting together with satisfying mechanical precision. "Is any of that actually true, Instructor?" "Some of it." Keffer folded his arms, watching Rachel yank a servo assembly from the desk's drawer mechanism. Humans did achieve orbital flight with chemical propulsion and computational systems that wouldn't qualify as children's toys by modern standards. They survived 3 near-extinction events through sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. He moved closer to Rachel's station, observing her work with clinical detachment. "But here's what the myths don't mention. Improvisation isn't engineering. Luck isn't methodology. And getting results once under crisis conditions doesn't mean you understand underlying principles." Rachel had the desk completely disassembled now. Components spread across her workstation in controlled chaos. She examined the holographic projector assembly with the focus usually reserved for diffusing explosives. A karate cadet at the adjacent station designation KR-556. Their crystalline carapace reflecting the hangar's harsh lighting leaned toward her. Karate were known for cautious, methodical engineering philosophy. They didn't improvise. They calculated. "Terran," KR 556 said quietly, voice like wind through crystal chambers. "That projector assembly. You're looking at it like it's a component. It is a component. It's a civilian holographic display system rated for office environments. Temperature-controlled spaces. No vibration tolerance. No impact resistance. I know what it's rated for. Then you know it's useless for combat application." Rachel set the projector down and reached for the desk's structural support beams. Hollow aluminum, lightweight, designed to hold data pads and beverage containers. Nothing more. "Thanks for the concern," she said softly. Across the hangar, real progress emerged. VK-293's turret had power routing and functional targeting arrays. A Macron cadet assembled a shield generator from proper military components. Even struggling cadets had something recognizable taking shape. Rachel had furniture parts and what looked like an increasingly desperate plan. 2 hours in, KR 556 couldn't stop watching. The Karate had finished their own Construct 30 minutes ago, a standard deflector array with redundant power systems. Textbook defensive positioning. Zero innovation, but also zero risk of catastrophic failure. They'd run diagnostics twice. Everything checked optimal. The Terran station looked like an explosion in a recycling facility. "You're using the support beams as articulation frames," KR 556 observed, unable to help themselves. Karate analyzed. It was what they did. Rachel had the hollow aluminum struts, arranged in a skeletal configuration that vaguely resembled a quadrupedal structure. Vaguely, if you squinted. "Weight distribution," Rachel said, drilling mounting points into the aluminum with a precision tool clearly not designed for that material. "These beams won't hold much, but they don't need to. Just enough to support articulation without collapsing under their own momentum. Articulation requires actuators. Military-grade servo systems. You have desk drawer mechanisms. Desk drawer mechanisms with 12-axis micro-adjustment capability and response times under 40 milliseconds. Rachel didn't look up, hands moving with unsettling confidence. They're designed to compensate for building movement, user weight shifts, environmental vibration. The tolerance thresholds are actually tighter than standard military servos for anything under 50 kilograms. KR 556's carapace shifted through 3 shades of confused amber. That's technically accurate, but those systems aren't built for combat stress loads. They're not built for combat stress loads yet. Rachel grinned without humor. Everything's built for something else first. You just have to convince it to have an identity crisis. Across the hangar, VK-293 had moved from assembly to testing phase, running his turret through targeting sequences. Smooth, professional, exactly what instructors wanted to see. He glanced at Rachel's station and shook his head. "She's going to fail," he muttered to another cadet. "Have you seen what she's building? The drones won't have to kill her. Physics will do it first." Keffer appeared at Rachel's station again, unable to resist watching this particular disaster unfold in real time. He studied the skeletal frame, the exposed wiring, the components that absolutely should not be connected to each other. "Explain your power distribution schema." Rachel gestured at a rat's nest of cables that made KR 556's orderly mind ache. Holographic projector draws peak power at 18 watts. I'm routing that through the servo control system with a capacitor buffer from the display panel's backup battery. Total available output may be 200 watts continuous, 500 burst. That's absurd. Combat systems require minimum kilowatt range sustained power. For sustained combat, sure. She was attaching the projector assembly to what might generously be called the construct's head. But the trial isn't about sustained combat. It's about surviving engagement. Different problem. Ketver's expression suggested he was watching someone explain why jumping off a cliff might be aerodynamically interesting. Target acquisition difficulty is not a combat doctrine. It is if you're outgunned. The 1-hour warning sounded across the hangar. Cadets shifted into high gear, running final diagnostics, reinforcing weak points, checking ammunition feeds and power cells. The atmosphere thickened with nervous energy. Rachel kept working, methodical and focused, like she had all the time in the world. Terran, KR-556 said softly, "What you're building, it won't survive first contact." Probably not. Then why? Because survival isn't the same as victory, and victory isn't the same as passing. She attached a final servo connection, and the aluminum frame twitched slightly, like something dreaming about movement. I just needed to work long enough to prove a point. What point? Rachel finally stood, stretching her back with audible pops, surveying her creation with the critical eye of someone who knew exactly how much they were asking from inadequate materials. That improvisation isn't the opposite of engineering. It's just engineering with honesty about your constraints. The 30-minute warning blared. VK-293 was doing confidence checks, his turret swiveling smoothly through targeting arcs. Other cadets secured their constructs, activated primary systems, retreated to observation positions. Rachel powered up her construct. The aluminum frame shuddered. Servos whined a sound too high-pitched, too civilian, completely wrong for military application. The holographic projector flickered through a diagnostic sequence, casting stuttering light across the hangar floor. It stood up, barely. The articulation was jerky, the weight distribution questionable, the entire assembly looking like it might fall apart if someone breathed too hard near it. But it stood. KR-556 single quotes, S carapace flushed pure white. Karate equivalent of genuine shock. VK-293 stopped his pre-combat checks, staring across the hangar. Kethva set down his datapad very carefully. The Terran's desk had legs and something that might charitably be called tactical intent. Rachel patched one final cable connection, and the construct took an experimental step forward. The movement was all wrong, not mechanical, not smooth. Something organic and unstable, and completely outside standard engineering doctrine. Combat phase initiating in 10 minutes, the hangar's automated system announced. All cadets to observation stations. Constructs to starting positions. Rachel guided her creation to the designated start zone, then retreated to the reinforced observation booth. She collapsed onto the bench next to KR-556, hands still trembling slightly from adrenaline and exertion. "That was insane," KR-556 said. "Yep, it shouldn't work." "Probably won't. Then why do you look satisfied?" Rachel leaned back, watching through armored glass as her cobbled-together construct settled into a crouch that would give any proper engineer nightmares. The aluminum frame caught the hangar lights at strange angles. The holographic projector hummed with barely contained energy. "Because even if it fails," she said quietly, "at least it'll fail interestingly." The hangar doors opened. The combat drones entered, and everyone in that observation booth realized simultaneously that interesting might be the most terrifying word in human engineering. The drones came in. Fast. Academy standard hunter-killers, sleek and efficient. Their targeting sensors already painting every construct in the hangar with acquisition lasers. 12 units total, programmed for overwhelming force against stationary defensive positions. They moved in coordinated patterns, textbook pack tactics designed to exploit gaps in coverage and concentrate fire. VK-293's turret opened up first calculated bursts of suppression fire that forced two drones into evasive maneuvers exactly as trained. His construct held position, tracking targets with mechanical precision. 3 other cadets' shield generators flared to life, creating overlapping defensive zones. Standard doctrine. Predictable response curves. The Terran construct did something nobody expected. It ran not away from the drones, perpendicular to their approach vector, using the hangar support columns for cover in ways the simulation parameters hadn't accounted for. The aluminum frame moved with disturbing fluidity, those inadequate servos somehow translating desperate energy into erratic motion that looked less like military tactics and more like prey animal survival instinct. What is it doing? An instructor's voice crackled through the observation booth speakers. Not Kethver. Someone from the tactical assessment team watching from the control room. Evading, Kethver replied, voice carefully neutral. Evasion isn't an objective. Constructs are meant to hold position and demonstrate combat viability. Tell that to the Terran's desk. 2 drones broke formation, repositioning to flank the construct's trajectory. Their targeting computers ran probability matrices, calculating intercept angles and optimal firing solutions. The holographic projector flared to life. Suddenly, there were 3 constructs. No, 5. No, 7 identical aluminum frames scattered across that section of hangar, each moving independently, each throwing off the same thermal signature and electromagnetic profile. Decoys, KR-556 breathed, their carapace cycling through rapid-fire color analysis. She's using the projector to create false target profiles. Holographic deception isn't new technology, someone said dismissively. It is when your projector is powered by a desk's backup battery and you're generating holograms while actively moving. KR-556's analytical mind was working overtime. The processing requirements alone should overwhelm civilian systems. The power draw should have collapsed her entire network 30 seconds ago. The drones opened fire on the decoys. Pulse weapons discharged. Energy blooms dissipating against empty air, while the real construct threw itself behind the supply crate with the kind of desperate momentum that should have broken every servo in its frame. She's not fighting, VK-293 said, watching his own turret systematically engage targets with proper military precision. She's just scrambling. Rachel said nothing, but her fingers drummed against the observation booth's armrest. Not nervously, KR-556 noticed, counting, timing something. The drones recalibrated, adapting to holographic interference by switching to motion tracking and heat signature prioritization. Smarter, more dangerous. They converged on the construct's actual position. The telescoping document arm that ridiculous spring-loaded reading. Mechanism snapped forward. It didn't hit a drone. It hit a support column's welding seam. The impact triggered a resonance fracture, and suddenly 300 kilograms of structural paneling crashed down directly into the drone's approach vector. Not enough to destroy them, but enough to scatter their formation and force emergency obstacle avoidance protocols. In that 2-second window of computational chaos, the construct moved again. She's weaponizing the environment, Kethver said quietly. That's not. The tactical assessment instructor started. I know it's not standard doctrine. I'm observing what's happening, not what should be happening. The construct reached a junction where hangar maintenance systems stored hydraulic equipment. The document arm struck again. This time, against a coolant valve nobody had considered a tactical asset. Pressurized fluid sprayed across the combat zone. The drone's sensors couldn't penetrate the mist. Thermal tracking became useless. Visual acquisition dropped to near-zero effectiveness, and somewhere in that manufactured fog, the construct was moving. A drone emerged from the coolant cloud, circling wide to re-establish targeting parameters. It never saw the aluminum frame drop from a maintenance gantry. directly onto its dorsal plating. The impact wouldn't have disabled a military construct. The desk frame lacked mass, structural integrity, any quality that made for effective kinetic assault. But those hollow aluminum struts, they bent on impact. And in bending, they channeled force into the drone's articulation joints instead of its armor. The drone's mobility system seized, trying to compensate for damage that wasn't actually there, overcorrecting until it drove itself into a structural support beam hard enough to trigger its own safety shutdown. Cascade failure through induced navigation error, KR 556 whispered, their analytical mind barely keeping pace with what they were witnessing. She made it kill itself. The construct hit the ground running, if that momentum-driven lurching could be called running. 2 more drones acquired targeting lock. The holographic projector created a wall of false contacts between the construct and its pursuers. The document arm grabbed a discarded equipment rack and swung it like a medieval flail. 1 drone took evasive action directly into another drone's firing line. Friendly fire. Both units staggered, their threat assessment protocols experiencing computational seizures, trying to explain how they just shot each other. This is insane, VK293 said. His turret had disabled 1 drone properly, professionally, exactly as the trial intended. The Terran's construct had caused 3 drones to effectively eliminate themselves through induced chaos. This isn't combat engineering. No, Keffer agreed. It's something else. Across the hangar, other constructs were performing adequately. Shields held. Turrets maintained firing discipline. Cadets would pass with respectable scores, demonstrating competent application of established military engineering principles. The Terran construct fell off a cargo container, landed badly, lost its structural strut, kept moving with 3-limbed asymmetrical locomotion that made targeting solutions impossible because nothing moved like that. Nothing was supposed to move like that. A drone cornered it against a bulkhead. No escape vectors. Clean kill shot. The construct's projector overloaded. The electromagnetic pulse wasn't intentional, couldn't have been intentional. The component was actively failing, burning out from demands it was never designed to handle. But the pulse scrambled every drone within 6 meters. Just for a second. Just long enough. The construct dragged itself back into motion, trailing sparks and ambition. She's going to win, KR 556 said, disbelief crystallizing into horrified certainty. That malfunctioning pile of office equipment is going to outlast military-grade constructs. She's not winning, Keffer corrected, though his voice lacked conviction. She's surviving. Barely. Inelegantly. Without dignity or methodology. Survival is the objective. Instructor, recommend trial termination. The tactical assessment team's voice crackled through again. The Terran construct is creating unsafe engagement conditions. Keffer watched the aluminum frame execute something between a dodge and a controlled collapse. Avoiding pulse fire through sheer unpredictable motion. Unsafe for whom? For everyone. The engagement profile is completely outside normal parameters. So was the equipment allocation. Silence from the control room. The construct's holographic projector finally died completely. The display panel cracking with a sound like breaking promises. 2 servos seized. The aluminum frame developed stress fractures that should have been catastrophic. But it was still moving. Still causing problems. Still refusing to understand that it had already lost. Combat trial terminated, the automated system announced. All drones returning to standby stations. The hangar fell silent except for cooling metal and exhausted pneumatics. VK293's turret stood intact. Ammunition expended efficiently. Performance metrics optimal. KR-556 single quotes S-shield generator had maintained. Defensive coverage within design specifications. every cadet who'd followed doctrine, who'd built properly, who'd done everything right. Their constructs had performed exactly as expected. And in the middle of the hangar, surrounded by disabled drones and environmental damage that would take maintenance crews hours to catalog, the Terran's construct finally collapsed. It looked like wreckage, like evidence of catastrophic design failure, like something that had survived entirely by accident. Rachel stood slowly, a reflection ghostly in the observation booth's armored glass. "Instructor," she said quietly, "permission to retrieve my construct?" Kethver stared at the aluminum skeleton, the burnt-out projector, the spring-loaded arms still twitching with residual tension. "Granted," he said, "though I'm not entirely sure what you built qualifies as yours anymore. It might have achieved independent sentience through sheer spite." Rachel almost smiled. Almost. The medical bay cleared cadets faster than expected, mostly minor stress injuries. One case of overconfidence requiring psychological adjustment. Rachel sat alone on a bench outside the evaluation chamber, waiting for her trial assessment with the kind of practiced patience that suggested she'd spent significant time waiting for verdicts. The door opened. Kethver emerged, followed by 2 members of the Tactical Assessment Board and someone from the Academy's Research Division, whose presence made absolutely no sense. "Walk with me." "Cadet." They moved through corridors connecting training facilities to faculty offices, passing display cases showcasing historical military engineering achievements, elegant weapons, sophisticated defense systems, things that looked intentional. "Your construct is currently being examined by 3 separate departments," Kethver said conversationally. "Structural analysis wants to understand how aluminum furniture components survived combat stress loads. Systems integration is trying to reverse engineer your power distribution schema. And tactical doctrine has filed a formal complaint that your performance violated the spirit of military engineering principles." Rachel kept her expression neutral. "Sounds like I failed then." "Oh, you absolutely failed by conventional metrics." Kethver pulled up a holographic assessment grid. "Technical compliance, 22%. Your construct violated 17 safety regulations, used unapproved materials, and achieved what the assessment board politely termed functionally unreplicable results. Your power systems were unstable. Your structural integrity was borderline delusional. And your tactical approach would give any proper logistics officer a stress-induced medical emergency." They reached his office. He gestured her inside. However, Kethver sat behind his desk, regarding her with an expression that wasn't quite disapproval anymore. "Combat effectiveness, 96%. You disabled or caused the cascade failure of 7 engagement drones using equipment that shouldn't have powered on, let alone fought. Your construct survived longer than 60% of properly engineered systems." He paused. "And you did it with furniture. Administrative class furniture." "There's a distinction," Rachel said softly. "Is there really?" Kethver leaned back, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely curious rather than skeptical. "How did you know it would work?" "I didn't, not entirely. That's not acceptable engineering practice." "No," she agreed. "It's acceptable problem solving." "Different thing." The door opened again. KR 556 stood at the threshold, their carapace pulsing apologetic blue for the interruption. "Instructor, the research division has questions about load-bearing calculations that don't exist. Tell them the Terran improvised. They've asked me to explain improvisation in mathematical terms." "I don't know how." Rachel spoke up. "Tell them I ignored what the components were rated for and tested what they could actually survive. There's usually a gap between those numbers." KR 556's carapace shifted to confused amber. "You mean you didn't calculate stress tolerances?" "I calculated that aluminum doesn't care what it's supposed to hold if you distribute force correctly. The rest was just applied optimism. That's horrifying. It worked, though. That's what makes it horrifying. Other cadets began appearing. First VK-293, then others, drawn by the kind of gossip that spreads through military academies at light speed. The Terran who fought with a desk. The construct that shouldn't exist. The trial that tactical doctrine didn't know how to score. Kethver raised a hand, silencing the growing debate. The assessment board has reached a determination. He pulled up the official evaluation, and Rachel read her scores with detached interest. Technical proficiency, 31%. Safety compliance, 14%. Design replicability, 8%. Tactical effectiveness, 96%. Innovation factor, error calculation outside standard parameters. Overall trial result, conditional pass. Conditional? Rachel read the designation twice, certain she'd misunderstood. You passed the survival objective comprehensively. However, your methods cannot be taught, replicated, or recommended under any circumstance. Kethver pulled up a secondary document. You're also receiving a formal commendation from the Advanced Tactics Division, which I'm told is unprecedented for someone who scored single digits in safety compliance. He slid the commendation across his desk. Rachel picked it up, reading the official Academy seal and the single-sentence assessment. Effective. Unapproved. Do not repeat. Recommend advanced placement. Advanced placement in what? She asked. That's still being determined. Apparently, you've created a new problem. What? To do with engineers who achieve results through methods that give institutional review boards anxiety attacks. VK-293 stared at the commendation. She scored lower than anyone in the cohort and got advanced placement. She scored lower than anyone while accomplishing more with less, Kethver corrected. Those aren't contradictory outcomes. They're just uncomfortable ones. The cadets filtered out slowly, returning to post-trial analysis and equipment maintenance. KR-556 lingered at the doorway. Terran, your construct. The researchers asked if you wanted it back after they finished documentation. Rachel considered this. Tell them they can keep it. But I want the nameplate. The what? The desk's identification plate. Should still be attached to what used to be the primary structural component. Alone again, Kethver regarded his newest problem student with something approaching respect. You understand this trial will be taught for years? As inspiration or warning? He pulled up archived footage of her construct's erratic assault on military doctrine, about the terrifying gap between technical proficiency and functional creativity, about what happens when someone ignores what components are supposed to do and asks what they can do instead. Sounds dangerous. It is dangerous. It's also why humans terrify other species. He paused, choosing words carefully. Because you don't see limitations. You see negotiations. Rachel stood, tucking the commendation into her uniform pocket. Permission to speak freely. Instructor. Granted. When you gave me that desk, you expected me to fail. Prove humans didn't belong in military academies. Demonstrate that improvisation was just luck wearing a myth. Kethver said nothing, which was answer enough. But here's what you actually proved. She gestured at the holographic display, still showing her construct's combat footage. That giving someone inadequate resources and expecting failure says more about the evaluator than the evaluated. And that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate what someone will accomplish when they've got something to prove. She left. Kethver sat alone in his office, watching the footage loop. The aluminum frame lurching through tactical chaos. The projector burning itself out for just one more holographic decoy. The document arm striking with desperate precision. Somewhere in the Academy's research division, analysts were measuring stress fractures and cataloging impossible engineering. recording performance metrics that shouldn't exist, trying to explain in mathematical terms how desperation plus creativity equaled results. 3 months later, Rachel would frame that commendation in her quarters. Beneath it, mounted with considerably more care than military decorations probably deserved, she'd place the desk's nameplate. It'd still read, "Property of Administrative Services." And 5 years after that, when Kethfer lectured new cohorts on engineering fundamentals, he'd play footage of the trial. Not to inspire them. Inspiration came from success stories that followed proper methodology. No. He played it as a warning about the human who built a combat system from office furniture, who passed a military trial with the lowest technical scores in Academy history, who proved that sometimes the most sophisticated engineering answer to "what can this do?" is simply more than you think. The cadets would laugh at the absurdity. The instructors would mark it as cautionary evidence. And somewhere, humans would keep turning rocks into hammers, hammers into tools, tools into weapons, weapons into solutions, and solutions into problems for everyone who insisted there was only one right way to build things, because humans didn't see objects. They saw potential having an identity crisis, and apparently, that was terrifying enough to earn advanced placement.